So it seems that the Righteous Crusaders of Sigismund have been given a fast-moving infantry detachment as their Grotmas gift. Let's talk about the Wrathful Procession and what it can do in-game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Templars, and in this video I thought we'd go over the new Grotmas detachment for them in the Wrathful Procession. As ever, these detachments have been coming out each and every day in December so far, all the way up to Christmas. A new detachment for every single faction in the game, all fully playable in the core match play rules, with points cost for the enhancements written on them. They'll all be appearing in the Warhammer app in January. It seems that day 22 is for the Black Templars, which means we just have the 2 more days left. Yesterday we had the Tau Empire, and tomorrow will be the World Eaters, which means the Space Wolves will be on the 24th. And then usually they have some sort of 40k Christmas model reveal on Christmas Day itself, which is widely expected to be the Emperor's Children. I'll certainly spare a little bit of time to make a quick video if so. For the Black Templars today though, we have the Wrathful Procession, basically an infantry assault formation with chaplain style litanies, and to me the styling of it feels quite similar to Righteous Crusaders in a bunch of ways, though the lore of it is more that their leaders are yelling litanies at them, inspiring them to acts of faith and vengeance for the Emperor in all sorts of different ways. A bunch of the names and styling kind of hark back to their unique chaplain style litanies that they had back in 9th edition and before. Though in general it doesn't really seem that the detachment actually needs you to build around chaplains all that much. There's only one enhancement that's actually locked to them, but the buffs here do apply mainly to infantry and mounted things more so than tanks and vehicles and transports. I feel like it might be a bit of a tall order as it's competing against the Righteous Crusaders, which as detachment rules go has generally been a pretty solid one. Though it'll certainly be relevant for the Black Templars, having only one way to play at the moment. And I guess the Space Wolves and World Eaters will also be index armies that get a second detachment in the next couple of days. The core rule for the detachment is Zealous Litanies. Basically, each battle round you get to pick one of these 3 litany buffs, and that buff applies to literally all your infantry and mounted units, though none of your dreadnoughts and tanks or vehicles. Your choices are a +2 to move and +1 to advance rolls, +1 strength to melee weapons, or a 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks. Out of those 3, I feel like the first 2 are probably going to be the most relevant. In particular, army-wide +2 to move and +1 to advance is pretty nice for a melee army to surge their way towards the enemy. It means that standard on the board 6-inch moving infantry, they'll be moving 8 inches and then charging, or fast-moving things like jump intercessors would move a big 14 inches and then charge, and if they need to advance around to jump from terrain to terrain, then they get a little bit of boost there as well. There isn't any sort of advance and charge stratagem in the detachment though, so if you're trying to get into close combat, you can't usually make use of both of those at once. The +1 strength to melee weapons is another nice one. That means that your chainswords will be hitting at strength 5, and basically that's just going to have to be weighed up against whether or not it actually makes any break points against the targets that you're going to be charging. I guess with Helbrecht's buff, his own squad could be strength 6 chainswords if it desires. Compared with lethal or sustained hits though, I'm not sure it's the most overwhelming thing in the world, just because against a whole bunch of targets it won't do anything. Say for example a bunch of power fists and things going from strength 8 to strength 9 rarely makes too much difference. Finally, there's the 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks. I guess if you've got lots of units out in the open, it could be worth going for. It's not terrible for 3+ saves against AP3 or AP4 attacks, though bear in mind that it doesn't apply to tanks and vehicles, unlike the Righteous Crusaders 6+ feel no pain, which I think is a kind of big deal, given that you might want some dreadnoughts or transporting some infantry about. And a lot of the time it's not actually going to be relevant at all if they're in cover, or if they already have their good invulnerable saves like Terminators or Blade Guard. I have a feeling that it's probably going to be more the first 2 that tend to get used a bit more. I'd say the movement one is actually probably the most interesting. Having the unit surging forward to combat extra fast is pretty nice, and then maybe the strength one when they make combat, if they can get their charges away very reliably, and if it's actually going to make a difference. Then we've got Stratagems. For 1 command point we've got Fueled by Faith. This one's a 5+ feel no pain against mortal wounds. Always a little bit situational this one. It basically raises your unit's durability by 50% against those kind of attacks, so it's definitely strong enough to make use of if you're being hit by a bunch of them. But in general it's going to be relevant against things like devastating wound combos, or maybe certain armies like Thousand Suns and Doom Bolts flying around. Next up, for 1 command point, there's Armour of Contempt, the standard one of worsening AP. As per the balanced data slate, that now only works against 1 unit, so is far less good for multiple things focusing down one of your squads. But it's still really quite effective in melee, as you're usually only going to be fighting 1 squad there. It's not going to be quite as good at protecting one big sturdy threat from a whole bunch of different shooting units all lining up on the same target though. Next up, for 1 command point, we've got Brute Fervor. This one allows you to reroll hit rolls of 1 in the fight phase, and you also don't take any penalties to the hit roll or your weapon skill. Reroll ones to hit, unfortunately, on its own is a bit of a tame buff. It's basically plus 17% damage output, and I feel like to justify it, you'd absolutely need to be in a situation where literally every tiny bit of damage counted. Maybe slaying one extra enemy model could matter big, say in terms of how much they strike you back. It'd probably need to be a big scary one of your units fighting as well, and also not have any rerolls going on to start with. It feels like the biggest impact to be is if you're actually rerolling any weapon skill or hit roll penalties. If you have that and the rerolls, then it's probably going to be worth the damage boost if it's against a target that's meaningful. For one command point, there's Relentless Momentum. This one allows your models to fight within 3 inches, presuming their squad is actually in engagement range of the enemy unit, so you can't use this one to hit things that you're not engaged with at all. That one could be handy for big ranked up Crusader squads, though they're really quite pricey at the moment after Games Workshop put their prices up quite so much in a previous update. I feel like occasionally this one could matter big though, say if your opponent's trying to do the 1 inch from ruin walls trick, provided you could actually get into engagement range with say the end of that unit, you could use this to allow a whole bunch of your models just to fight straight through that ruin wall and take them down anyway. Could just be handy for getting a lot of bodies into melee, or giving you more options as to which unit you fight in a multiple combat I suppose. Either way, like the first one, it still seems a bit on the niche side. Next up, for one command point, we've got Cascade the Demagogues. This one's precision in melee for any unit. This one is quite a nice one, I think. If there's an enemy character leading a squad, then you can just get to hit him first. I feel like a lot of the time this is going to be far better than Epic Challenge, as you've got an entire squad's worth of damage to throw at the character, and hopefully lay them low before the rest of your attacks go into the rest of the squad that's left. I feel like this one is quite a solid one, again kind of specific against the right enemy targets, as not all enemy units have leaders that you either want to kill first or are going to be charging on the front line, but in any case I think this for one command point is nice enough. Finally, we've got Voice of Devotion for one command point. An infantry or mounted unit replace their current active litany with another, so they flex into either the +2 move and +1 advance, or +1 strength, or the 5+ invulnerable save. You have to do it in the command phase, so you have to commit kind of early. Again, I'd probably say that the first two are going to be the ones that you'd want to go for more so than the invulnerable, perhaps particularly for this stratagem given that you're starting it at the start of your turn. So I guess after your army's picked one of them at the start of the battle round, you could flex one unit into a different one then. Maybe the rest of the army wants the damage buff, but one unit is a bit too far away and needs the movement boost to have any chance of a charge. Or I guess in theory if you went for the invulnerable save one, you could have that for the enemy turn if they went first, and then flex into one of the movement or damage ones after. I still feel like this one's going to be kind of niche for one command point though. Paying for 2 extra movement towards your charge is okay I guess, but you'd have to be at the right sort of brackets where that's actually going to be really meaningful, and more so than just saving a command point reroll for the charge roll in the first place. And again, the +1 strength is only going to be relevant against the right targets, and I feel like even if they might help out, they might not always help out to the extent where it is worth spending that command point on this. Finally, we've got the enhancements. There's Taramund Sensor, which is 15 points. This one's a battle shock at the start of the fight phase at -1 to the test, and you give that to each enemy unit in engagement range. This one's often at least a bit niche or meaningless, could prevent a stratagem potentially, or maybe stop an enemy unit that's trying to charge you and take your objective from just stealing it from you. If you have any objective control left, then it'll still be yours if they fail, I suppose. I feel like these battle shock debuff ones really tend to be the first choice for people, particularly as they're just so unreliable. If you're fighting against a leadership 6 army, then they're still going to pass most of the time even with this, so it's basically a small chance at some big disruption, and maybe a very small chance at some actual extra victory point swings. Next up, there's the Benediction of Fury for 10 points. This one gives your chaplain melee weapons devastating wounds, which is fair enough. That's just for the chaplain themselves though, and not for the whole unit. Seems like it could be fun on paper for the bite chaplain potentially. They get AP 1 and damage 3 attacks, and devastating wounds seems nice on that. Or I guess could be quite nice for a chaplain leading a Stern Guard veteran squad potentially. They could use Oath of Moments to reroll or wound rolls and get a whole bunch of devastating wounds there. Next up, for 25 points, there's the Pyrebrand. This one gives models in the bearer's unit stealth. Seems like this is alright for a big ranked up Crusader squad, or maybe an Assault Terminator squad, marching up the board that's going to be tanking some damage. Feels like it's going to be reasonable enough on something that's already big, tough and tanky. I guess you could put it on Outriders or something as well. It does kind of feel like an inferior version of the 10 Houses Bones though. I'd certainly rather have a 5+ feel no pain than the stealth keyword. It also doesn't do anything against melee, which I'd bear in mind. Then finally we've got Sacred Rage, which is 30 points. That's a once per battle fights first, which can be really quite a big deal. That does seem really nice on paper for Sword Brethren or similar, meaning they could charge in and destroy something in your turn, and then if the opponent is a melee force, then they're going to have real problems with how they deal with them. Either having to potentially use some sort of janky close combat trick if they can, Or just think about not charging them with something, or charging them with so many things that they can't kill everything. I guess you could weigh that up versus just buying them a Judaseer though. Overall, I feel like there's interesting stuff in here, though I must admit I'm pretty underwhelmed by the stratagems, and my first impressions are that it's probably not going to be quite as strong as Righteous Crusaders. For the litanies, the movement one I'd say is probably the single most important one, getting to go 8 inches with your on-the-board foot troops, or 14 inches with jump intercessors or similar. Both of those seem really quite nice, though still if you're trying to get into combat it might not quite have the same sort of big advance and charge threats that you could get from Gladius if you wanted. I guess in theory you could go for the movement one early game and then the +1 strength one when you actually start to make contact, if it's actually going to make a difference at all. And if your opponent's the one that goes first, it means that you could always just look at your units and see whether or not that 5+ invulnerable save is going to make enough of a difference to go for it, depending on what's out of cover and what sort of enemy unit damage profiles are going to be going into your squads and what's exposed. Otherwise, for the stronger options, that surprise precision melee could be really big against the right thing. That could absolutely change a big combat in the midboard if the opponent's kind enough to be using characters that can be killed easily. And otherwise, I feel like the only other really big impactful thing is that Fights First enhancement. Having that in the Sword Brethren squad could be really nice, though as mentioned you could potentially just be doing that with a Judaseer if you really want it. I think it would be kind of hilarious to put it on a Castellan with High Marshal Helbrecht in the same unit and a Sword Brethren squad. That unit's just ridiculously dangerous, and would be kind of hilarious to have that fighting first too, potentially. Otherwise, the Stealth and the Chaplain Devastating Wounds enhancements both seem okay as well, and a bunch of the other stratagems are usable, they just feel really quite niche and not going to come up all the time. I feel like at first impressions it's probably not going to be stronger than the Index, unfortunately. It still may be interesting enough that you could have a few games with it to try it out, as it does have some interesting options. I know you can flex the litanies in this one, though I feel like you're probably just going to get more from say the 6+ Feel No Pain and the lethal hits or sustained hits. It helps that the Feel No Pain is able to affect the Templar tanks, vehicles and dreadnoughts as well, and just increases the durability of your army full stop. I feel like the 1 command points to flex into the Index Vows is a lot more impactful as well, with the sustained or lethal hits when you need them, or maybe anti-psyker on some big scary assault terminators. The durability one here feels far better with the Turnhouse's bones. I feel like perhaps above all the melee support stratagems are a fair bit better in Righteous Crusaders, extra AP and the chance to keep enemies in melee. I feel like they're going to come up more often, though the precision thing is nice. In any case though, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it. Do you reckon that the Detachment's a strong one, and how do you reckon it compares to Righteous Crusaders? Would you be tempted to give it a go with the extra movement and the things that it brings? I do feel like there's enough stuff that it'd still be interesting, particularly with faster moving ones, the Fights First thing, and every so often just killing an enemy character with precision. Feel free to check out the rest of the Grotmus Detachment playlist down in the video description. It looks like I'll be adding to that with the World Eaters tomorrow. Look forward to talking about them. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more. I certainly keep the 40k videos coming just about every day. And check out all the good stuff down in the video description. There's the channel's Patreon page with the option to support the channel if you'd like to, seeing certain videos early, an entry to the regular prize giveaways, plus the Warhammer 40k discount links, where if you order anything through them it supports the channel, as well as saving money versus Games Workshop. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.